Me, this is not just another nation. It is not just one of the family of nations. This is a nation with a great mission to perform for the benefit of liberty-loving people everywhere.
That we shall be as a city upon a hill.
These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country.
You've come to fight as three men. Three men you are. What will you do without freedom?
Proclaim liberty throughout all the land.
In one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight.
You gotta fight for your right.
Can you dig it?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Real News. It is 9:01 on this morning, which is July 7th. My name is Mr. Henry. We have a jam-packed show today. I could not be happier to bring this type of content to you with these type of people. Some of my best buddies in the entire world, just all circling around. My wife is over there, going to be a big help on this show as well. She listens in every single morning. Well, like I say she does, and she absolutely does with the little earbuds in, but frankly, she's right over there. She really wouldn't have a choice not to listen, even if she didn't want to. She loves that. Hey, man, welcome back to another show, realnewsradio.live, realnewsradio.live. That is the best place to find everything real news related, sort of the central landing page, if you will, of all the real news stuff. You can find us on Twitch, you can find us on Mixer, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, ThinkSpot, Minds, Parler, all the things, all the links are there. My name is Mr. Henry. David Shine Thompson sitting over there beside me, and Zig. David, buddy, before we hop into the headlines of this show, how you doing this morning, man? How's everything out on the East Tennessee way?
It is not bad, sir. Not bad at all. I'm enjoying my coffee out of my Don't Tread on Me cup.
Nice.
I am ready for today's show, but things are good. I'm still off that Independence Day high, like I'm still like feeling it. Like I was still telling people Happy 4th yesterday, like just because I was still feeling it. I'm like, I know it's old, but like maybe this festival should last a week instead of a day. Like maybe we should celebrate the great principles of the founding of America for like a whole week or something, because I'm still feeling the energy from that. I'm still juiced, and maybe it's because I'm on my third cup of coffee already. Or maybe it's just because America's awesome. I can't tell, but I'm fantastic. Good morning to everyone.
I don't know. You might, honestly, bro, you might have some there. I think if we celebrated it more often, it might cause people to have a greater reason to think, like, how far have we strayed from those original principles? How much more do we possibly need to fight to get back to some of those? Hey, speaking of fighting to get back to some of those original principles, Zig, buddy, our buddy out in the PA way, how you doing, man? Tell them, for those that are brand new to the show, possibly a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you're doing with us this morning.
Yeah, my name is Zygmunt Reichenbach. I'm a grassroots engagement director for Americans for Prosperity Pennsylvania in my paid time. In my private time, I try to be a professional thinker, amateur drinker. Or perhaps that's the other way around.
Either one of those will work, man. I like them both. Oh, man. Hey, greatest audience in the nation appreciation segment here. Let us know how you're doing, where you're at in life, what you're doing, what philosophy you're into right now, what's driving, what's cranking your gears, so to speak. I don't know, man. What are you perturbed about? What are you into? Which series are you watching? I don't really care what information you give us, frankly. Just want to make sure that you're doing all right, see where you're at in life, what you need help with. And yeah, man, what you're into. That's kind of a new thing for us right now, of asking that in the greatest audience in the nation appreciation time. Like series you're watching, books you're reading, things, your YouTube videos you're scrolling through. Sean and I used to love doing this thing I called it rabbit trailing. The YouTube algorithm is not nearly as kind as it once was, but once upon a time, you used to be able to start on YouTube with a single video. About 3 hours later, you would stumble backwards into some beautiful epiphany, some TED Talk that you'd never heard of before, or I don't know, man, something that just like broke the mold. It was fantastic. Sherry said, huge. That's right. It's huge. Matt just said in Facebook, oh, America's on the right track for a dose of liberty and equality. Goodness, he is right. They're on the right track for a dose of something. Hey, let's dive headlong into the news, because obviously everyone's seeing that the headline for today, I'm sure they're all waiting for us to get to, is the problem with Marxism. That is a topic that will be coming up very, very shortly. Some local news to get through first here. Faithless Electors. That was a Supreme Court decision that came out yesterday. It was a 9-0 decision, one of the only 9-0 decisions we've had in a very long time, or at least I'll put it this way: one of the only 9-0 decisions that people are actually paying attention to that we've had in a very long time. That's probably the more accurate way to put it. And U.S. bans Chinese tech. Y'all want to know the real reason that I put that? They're banning TikTok, or Pompeo has suggested to ban TikTok. Frankly speaking, though, I don't know what's going on with Facebook anymore, so I don't want to throw the word TikTok out there and all of a sudden have something banned on this program. I know that's a little bit Alex Jones-esque conspiratorial thinking. That's where I am in my life, all right? Vulnerability breeding vulnerability. I don't want to put TikTok in a description because, like, I don't trust it, man. Anyways, here's the local stories. Governor Lee comes out yesterday, starting from WKRN.com headline. It'd actually be interesting to get Zig's take on this as to what's happening up in PA way, the Pennsylvania way. Here's the headline here: face masks required in Williamson County beginning Wednesday. Now, this is not a brand new development. I say that because most of our listeners are closely located to larger metropolitan areas: Knoxville, Nashville, maybe even some in Memphis. But this one in particular, out in Williamson County, technically where I am right now, is important because of Governor Lee's most recent executive order that was issued over the weekend. Here's the first line. After Governor Lee announced counties in Tennessee can enforce mandatory wearing of masks or face masks in public, Williamson County has opted to require residents to wear them when social distancing is not possible. And again, this is important because the other 6 counties that have health departments, those health departments have already made these decisions on behalf of the people, dare I say, without having actual representation. Whatever, it happened. We're here now. Let's deal with it type thing, right? The other remaining counties in this state have to rely upon an executive order to even be able to issue something like this, I think. And that's what Governor Lee's executive order did. That's why this update's important, because for folks like me in a county where the health department doesn't apply and sits in the similar way that it would in Knoxville, this is what we have. Now, the order here in Williamson County will go into effect Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. It's expected to expire at 11:59 p.m. on August 3rd. And you can see that that's in the show notes there, it is ordered type thing. I cut out all the other whereas nonsense. The it is ordered section basically comes down and says essentially what you've heard before. Now, I put that in the show notes just to show that this one is slightly more restrictive than what we've seen even in Knoxville. Knoxville's, or so says Mayor Kincannon, is only applicable to government buildings, which oddly enough it's something that I didn't expect from her at all. And I don't mean to be undercutting American Canon as often as I do on the show. It's just like, dude, she continually surprises me with like oddly libertarian leaning decisions. It's a weird way to put it because it's not a libertarian leaning decision to do something like this. But for her, it's like, dude, to restrict it to government owned buildings, it's like, goodness gracious, man, it's a heck of a lot better than what we got in Nashville with Mayor Cooper. It's a heck of a lot better than what I got in Williamson County, right? I mean, goodness gracious. Anyways, this one here is restricting. It's fairly restrictive. You basically have to wear it anywhere, everywhere, at all times. I did put some other indications in there as to where it does not apply. Anyone that's incapacitated or otherwise unable to remove a face mask, persons that are in a private residence, persons who are outdoors unless the person can substantially maintain an appropriate 6 feet, people under the age of 2. This one, persons in a place of worship, because they think it's probably going to have a constitutional problem, I would presume. So they just don't want to deal with that. It's sort of a preemptive thing because they put in here also, it's an exemption. You don't have to wear it in a place of worship unless a face covering is required in that place of worship, although persons in place of worship are also strongly encouraged to do so. It's like, dude, if we could require you to do it without y'all suing us for it, we absolutely would. Just let that be known type thing. Now, I'm really skimming through a lot of stuff, mainly because we have a packed show, but primarily because I want to get to the bottom portion here. Now, I really need to follow up with this portion. You'll see in the show notes here. By the way, show notes tagged at the top of the description section. Every single show that we do here, it's on Facebook, it's on YouTube. It doesn't matter. Wherever your description is in that video, click it. You can open up the Evernote link. Best way to follow along with the show. It also indicates how little of these opinions are actually mine. I just get up here and regurgitate other people's stuff and take credit for it. Back to the story at hand.
Great, don't tell him.
Yeah, that's right. This violation in Williamson County, or so is reporting as you're seeing in front of your face, is a Class A misdemeanor. Now, a quick Google search of Class A misdemeanor will indicate to you that it receives the highest sentence, generally up to a year in county jail. Class B misdemeanors are punished by, between 90 and 180 days, whereas Class C misdemeanors receive the least amount of times, usually 30 days or less. in Tennessee in particular, if you look up some type of statutory code with Class A misdemeanors in Tennessee, you're talking up to 11 months, 29 days in jail, and up to fines of $2,500. So it's a wide-ranging sort of application here. But I only bring up the Class A misdemeanor side of this because in Nashville, it was a Class C misdemeanor. The Class A here just kind of really jumps that shark, man. It's like, ah, goodness gracious. And to finalize this whole thing, and I want to kick it initially to Zig to get his opinion as how this is happening in Pennsylvania, if there's anything similar or what you're seeing going on up there, if you've heard anything about something like this. I just, honestly, the Class A misdemeanor thing, I had a buddy, we were talking yesterday. I was stalling there for a second because I didn't know if I should actually say this guy's name. I won't. But he ended up calling the local sheriff here in town and straight up asked him, like, listen, y'all are listening to this as a Class A misdemeanor. What are you going to do on the hypothetical situation that I were to encounter one of your officers and not be wearing a mask out in public? And he said, well, we'd issue you a citation. I said, okay, well, what does that citation mean? Is it a fine? What does it mean? He's like, well, it basically just means you have to show up for court. And he said, well, what if I just ball that thing up and just sort of throw it away and I just don't show up to court, or I just continue not wearing a face mask as I walk away from you? What happens then? And the sheriff's response was something to the effect of, well, I don't know. He said,
well, and that's a legitimate response, right? Because he can't give legal advice.
But that's
right.
The thing,
as a sheriff's deputy,
yes.
he literally legally, right? Like he's not allowed to give legal advice like that, or he's not licensed to do so. It's not legal to give legal advice when you're not an officer of the court, because he's not.
And you hit it on the head, man. He asked the follow-up question, said, what do you do? Are you going to arrest me if I don't wear these and take me into jail? And the sheriff said, I don't know. I have to speak with our legal team and get back to you. Sean, that's exactly what it was. That's exactly what it was. The sheriff couldn't give legal advice, and more importantly, possibly, he had not been given proper legal advice as to what happens if I just don't abide. What happens if I just don't do it? Because there are plenty of people right now that, again, in Mr. Henry's humble opinion, probably would be wearing face masks right now if you didn't force them to wear face masks right now. I don't know if that would ever be true, because we're in this weird sort of multiverse thing now where how could you ever possibly know that? We're sitting here where the edicts have been issued. The mandate is in place right now. It is what it is. But the sheriff in Williamson County says, like, I don't know, man. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what we would do, because our lawyers haven't told us what to do yet. I guess everyone's just hoping, fingers crossed, that we're not going to get to that point. I don't know, man. I've been rambling. Zig, buddy, let me kick it to you, specifically asking, in Pennsylvania, man, are y'all seeing any face mask mandates, or are you?
Well, actually, in Pennsylvania, there's a discrepancy. The governor says on Twitter that it's mandatory to wear a face mask outside, but if you read an actual newspaper article, it says that you only have to wear it if you cannot social distance. And yet the governor is promoting the opposite. And, perhaps to some degree, some of it is justifiable. It is justifiable to be concerned with other people's safety. On the other hand, it's the technology then that we have, the economics, the business, the money, the wealth, that has actually made us a safer society than ever before. If we are safer than what we've been at any other point in history, okay, due to our economic situation, why should we shut that down? Okay, if you really care about safety, let the economy run its course without all these ridiculous mandates.
Zig, let me then, I guess, just to sake of playing devil's advocate, I'll hit some of these Facebook comments and then come back to you here in a second with that devil's advocate question. Sherry said, ha ha ha, please stop calling that crap libertarian leaning. all right, valid, Sherry. Very valid. I will give her, when I said a second ago that American canons restricting the government buildings was libertarian leaning. All right,
that's Sherry not so much.
Yeah, I know. She's right. It is not libertarian leaning at all. I guess the better way I probably should have phrased that is in comparison with Mayor Cooper out here in Nashville, and in comparison with what I would have expected from a Kincannon in the heavily left-leaning city government, it's better than I would have expected. That's probably what I should have said. She is correct. There's nowhere near libertarian leaning. It's just much better than I would have thought, and much better than what we have in other parts of the states. Let's see here. Jonathan said, don't get me started on Nashville. John said the religious institutions already won a court case. Oh, that's right. That's a good point. when I said a second ago about the restrictions not applying to religious, institutions or whatever. I don't know if you're talking about the court case in New York, but I believe that was a federal case. We covered that last week as well. Sherry said the waters of what is libertarian are already so muddy. We don't need that. All right. Yeah, she's right. Let's see here. Matt said cops are not going to enforce anything called by the same tattletales that want to defund them. Oh, now that's an interesting angle. That's a very interesting angle. I actually wouldn't even picked up on that. I guess what Matt's saying is, like, if it's the same type of people that are asking to defund police officers that are the ones going to be hoping that this mask mandate would be enforced, well, then they probably would just voluntarily not abide, right? Now, I know in Knoxville, again, or at least as it pertains to the sheriff situation in Knox County, they've already said we're just not going to enforce those. Sherry finished off by saying here, I haven't been wearing a mask, and my response will be, I suppose if an officer would ask him about not wearing a mask, her response would be, I have a medical exemption, and according to HIPAA, I don't have to reveal my medical status to you. Can there police if you need? If we don't stand against this now, when will we stand up? We are already pretty far gone from liberty. No more sitting on the sidelines. I'm ready to go to jail. Whew. Sherry, man, I'm telling you, that's why we love Sherry, man. That's why we love her, dude. Zig, let me ask you this, though. All right, so most of this audience is fairly liberty-leaning. But just to play devil's advocate here, man, at what point then, I suppose, would somebody else's decisions start encroaching upon my freedom? Right, because that's the common critique that I've heard from people when it pertains to the mask situation is, all right, yeah, but your decision to not, say, wear a mask out in public is inevitably going to infect my, I don't know, health or something like that. I mean, I don't know. Where do you draw that line?
Yeah, that's not factually true. Most people are not dying from the virus, so that's not factually true. Typically, from what I've come to understand, that the only people who do die are folks over the age of 65. So me not wearing a mask doesn't affect you unless you're around 65-year-olds, in which case you ought to wear a mask and you ought to not go around anyone. Okay, so no, that's not factually true. I'm not encroaching on anything that you're doing because it is not going to kill you. And if you think that you've bought into some kind of paranoia mentality that is unwarranted for living in the 21st century, okay, we live in a time of unprecedented safety and security. And to think that you have to be paranoid about a virus that will not kill you is mind-boggling. That makes no sense. Either you have some problems, or you're exaggerating, or perhaps lying. So people need to get back into reality. Me not wearing a mask is not going to kill you.
Hey, speaking of getting back into reality, we were doing a show last week, Zig, and I don't know. I was bringing up this idea yet one more time that a couple years back, 2013, 2014, 2015, there started being open conversations in this country about, why don't we just try Marxism? Why don't we just try communism? And it's not new, this sort of moral equivalency. I mean, the exact same thing was happening back in the late 70s, early 80s. The exact same thing was happening. I mean, dude, there's multiple accounts of conversations of this starting up. This idea of sort of an intellectual superiority or an ethical equivalency, an intellectual equivalency, a moral equivalency. This idea was brought up when we were talking about something called the Solzhenitsyn prophecy. A guy who was a Russian expat, he came to America. He gave a commencement speech at Harvard University in complete Russian. He had to be interpreted and everything else. And it was basically a warning to future classes saying, hey, don't repeat the mistakes of what we just went through. Because he was specifically addressing academia and saying, you guys are either knowingly or unknowingly, and I'm not sure which one is worse, but knowingly or unknowingly pushing some of this stuff, and I'm not sure that you truly understand the full implications of what you're pushing yet. And someone in the comments section, as Shines, if you can go ahead and pull up that next video here, just to introduce this next topic. Someone in the comments section said, well, what's the problem with Marxism? Yeah, the PragerU video. Yeah. Someone in the comment section said, what's the problem with Marxism? And at the time, I don't want to say that I responded callously, because I don't, but I don't think I assumed that the person was either being contrarian or just sort of trolling, or I don't know, man, trying to have a little fun or something. I had led with the assumption, presumption is not the best word, but I had led with the assumption that this person knew full well what possible problems were with Marxism, and they were just trying to, like devil's advocate, start a conversation, do something. And then later on that afternoon, I had 2 subsequent conversations that asked very, very similar questions from individuals that listen to the show fairly often that called me afterwards. We're building a community here. That's what we do. We like to have conversations afterwards. Jump on, hit me up on Facebook. If you know my phone number, give me a call, whatever you want to do. That's the purpose why we do this program. I don't care about likes. I don't care about follows. I don't care about any of that stuff. Just want to make sure that we're building and growing with each other, man. That's true progress, right? And then it hit me after these 2 other conversations, Zig, that I was thinking like, okay, man, well, all right, dude, maybe that person in the comment section was being genuine. Maybe they were just straight up asking, like, you're claiming that there's a lot of organizations. Mr. Henry, you made the claim on the program last week. There's a lot of organizations right now that are using those tactics, that are taking some of this stuff on, that there might be something still appealing to Americans about Marxism. So the burden's kind of on you to show what's wrong with Marxism. The burden's kind of on you to say what is or is not. And with that being said, in that hard transition, let's get into the topic right now, the problem with Marxism. We're going to try and unpack this completely. That's why another reason why we have our boy Zig on today, to really develop this conversation. Sean, if you could, in a very traditional sense, start with what I think people would probably hear the most typical condensed version of this presentation, the problem with Marxism. If you can go ahead and play that video for us.
Ideas have consequences, sometimes good, sometimes bad, and sometimes catastrophic, like the ideas of Karl Marx. Born in Trier, Germany in 1818, Marx didn't invent communism, but it was on his ideas that Lenin and Stalin built the Soviet Union, Mao built communist China, and innumerable other tyrants, from the Kims in North Korea to the Castros in Cuba, built their communist regimes. Ultimately, those regimes and movements calling themselves Marxist murdered about 100 million people and enslaved more than 1 billion. Marx believed that workers, specifically those who did manual labor, were exploited by capitalists, the people who owned, as Marx put it, the means of production, specifically factories, but who did very little physical labor themselves. Only a workers' revolution, Marx wrote in Das Kapital, could correct this injustice. What would that revolution look like? Marx and his collaborator Friedrich Engels spelled it out point by point in the Communist Manifesto. It included the abolition of property and inheritance and the centralization of credit, communication, and transport in the hands of the state, and a lot more along the same lines. In other words, the state owns and controls pretty much everything. This notion was widely discussed and debated in European intellectual circles during Marx's lifetime, but nothing much came of it until Vladimir Lenin took power in Russia in 1917. This changed everything. Despite its repeated economic failures, Lenin's Russia, which became known as the Soviet Union, became the model for dictators around the world. Wherever Marx's ideas were practiced, life got worse. Not by a little, but by a lot. There is not a single exception to this rule. Not the Soviet Union, not Eastern Europe, not China, not North Korea, not Vietnam, not Cuba, not Venezuela, not Bolivia, not Zimbabwe. Wherever Marxism goes, economic collapse, terror, and famine follow. So, if cataclysmic failure, meaning terrible human suffering, is the inevitable legacy of Marxism, why do so many people, and now especially young people, defend it? The most common answer Marxism's advocates offer is that they, whoever they are, Lenin, Stalin, Chavez, never really practiced Marxism. They all somehow got it wrong. Marxism, we are told, is, at its essence, about sharing what we have, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, as Marx put it. Maybe that sounds good to you, but what does it mean? Who determines ability? Who determines need? The answer is the state, the ruling elite. Under Marxism, that's who has all the power. That's why the truth is this. Marxist dictators like Lenin, Mao, and Pol Pot really did get Marxism right. They wanted absolute power, and Marxism gave them the way to get it. Karl Marx never had to face the consequences of his theories. He lived most of his adult life breathing the free air of London, England, living off the generosity of his collaborator and
So look, there's a Wall Street Journal article that's linked in the show notes right now that I'm going to pull from primarily, but just know if you're following us along in the show notes, anything that you see underlined, the overwhelming majority of the time in these show notes is hyperlinked to something else. This topic in particular has a multitude of hyperlinks in it. So it will primarily be coming from a Wall Street Journal article, but there's a massive amount of other research that's put into some of this stuff. Normative Marxism advocates for a revolutionary overthrow of capitalism that would lead to socialism before eventually transforming into communism after class antagonisms in the state cease to exist. Now, look, give me 2 minutes here to go on a short little rant, and then I want to pull Zig back in here because all of what I'm about to say is categorically true. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, unfortunately, as far as I would say, it doesn't necessarily matter because something about this ideology is still so appealing that it's being pushed right now. And I don't necessarily know if it's just about a power struggle or a power dynamic or getting power back or just winning one over. Stick with me for a second. Although the Bolsheviks called for the abolition of private property, their real goal was spiritual. Matt just mentioned this in Facebook a second ago. Twin towers or temples on your head. You have the Trappist in the middle, talking about the religion of the Twin Towers. I don't necessarily know what that is, but I think he's making reference to some sense of their real goal being spiritual, to translate Marxist-Leninist ideology into reality. For the first time, a state was created that was based explicitly on atheism and claimed infallibility. That's why I went on this rant yesterday, man. And I know a lot of people don't follow some of the religious stuff that Sean and I get into on this show, and I get that. I know. I totally understand. A large part of the reason why we push it so often, though, is because it's just that the underlying precepts of that type of worldview indicate that one thing our founding fathers luckily believed in is that whatever we consider to be inherent rights, the substantive due process rights, the things that are in the Bill of Rights, they do not come from man. In fact, I think it was Hamilton and a few other founding fathers indicated, like, we don't want a Bill of Rights, y'all, because if we start listing this stuff out, anything we don't include in this list of rights, all of a sudden the people or somebody else is going to think because the government didn't list it, all of a sudden it's not included in an inherent right as a human being by way of our mere existence alone. Like indicating the list says like that's the totality of all the stuff that we don't do. That's not our right. I can't come tell you what is and is not a right of your existence. That is left solely to God alone, or at least something greater than you, something greater than the collective of all of us even. That's what this is getting at. And that's why Sean and I like to push that worldview so much, is because when it comes down to it, that's freedom and individuality. I cannot hold you accountable because it's something greater than me. Back to the article. For the first time, a state was created that based explicitly on atheism and claimed infallibility. This was totally incompatible with Western civilization, which presumes the existence of a higher power over and above society and the state. That's what I just explained, the purpose behind that. The Bolshevik coup had two consequences, In countries where communism came to hold sway, it hollowed out society's moral core, degrading the individual and turning him into a cog in the machinery of the state. It's actually one of my favorite guys I've been studying recently, this guy named Baudrillard. He has a critique of communism in an economic sense, of course, but he also applies it, or at least the person I've been following, applies his philosophy to modern-day social media. And he indicates that in this system of Marxism, social capitalism, communism, he ends up saying that like your posts you end up becoming a cog in the machine of social media, and your posts are the thing that carry value. You have no value. You think you're getting a dopamine hit because in some sense you actually are by way of chemical being released. But what's actually carrying value is the post itself. You are replaceable in this system. The thing that actually has value that you can trade like an actual commodity is not you. You could post the same thing through a pseudonym and get the exact same type of recognition. Therefore, it is the post that is carrying a value, the likes, the retweets, the whatever else. And you, in a dehumanizing way, all of a sudden start to lose value. In the same way, in the Russian system, it was not necessarily the general that had any value. It was not general such and such that had any value. It was the demarcation of general that carries value. Whoever so happens to be holding that position could be replaced tomorrow, and it doesn't matter. The person doesn't matter. Continuing. Communists committed murder on such a scale as to all but eliminate the value of life and destroy the individual consciousness in survivors. But the Bolsheviks' influence was not limited to these countries in the West. Communism inverted society's understanding of the source of its values, creating political confusion that persists to this day. Now, in 1920, a speech to, like a youth type group. Lenin said that communists subordinate morality
to the class struggle. Lenin said that communists subordinate morality to the class struggle. There apparently is a purpose to subordinating this morality. Good, quote, good was anything that destroyed the old exploiting society and helped to build a new communist society. There was purpose behind this. It was rationalized. It was justified. There was a reason to kill a bunch of folks. The approach separated guilt from responsibility. One more time, this approach separated guilt from responsibility. I believe that is almost the true epicenter of what is the major problem going on in society right now. Guilt and responsibility have been totally separated. There is no guilt because your guilt is justified through the action itself. You get what I'm saying? Anything is justified. Any action is justified. Anything bordering on violence, or dare I say violence itself, or at least the lack of condemning violence. Sorry, rather. Now, last thing I'll say, and then I want to kick it to my boy Zig, because that red portion you'll see in the show notes kind of switches the topics a little bit. Lenin's secret police here, a person that was running this 1918 instructions to interrogators, he wrote, quote, "We're not waging war against individuals. We are exterminating the bourgeoisie as a class. Do not look for evidence that the accused acted in word or deed against Soviet power. The first question should be, to what class does he belong? It is this that should determine his fate." You got to have a lot of faith to follow something like that. Almost in a very religious sense, you have to have a lot of faith to be able to follow that it is sort of a sacrifice to the system, therefore it is justified. I think
sounds like Hinduism. It sounds like the class system in the ancient Hindi religion, the Vedas. What your class was determined a lot about what kind of jobs you could have, what position you held in society, and then that stuck with you through multiple generations.
This red portion of the notes, by the way, Shine, it's going to slowly get into the presentation that you've heard quite often. That you'll see the numbers here. You can go ahead and scroll on and forward if you're following the show notes if you want to. But eventually, you'll start to see and hear the presentation that eventually this idea of Marxism leads to hundreds and hundreds of millions of death. Be it by way of famine, in an economic sense, or warfare, or just straight, pure, unadulterated genocide, state-sponsored genocide. It doesn't matter. The numbers that you end up hearing is anywhere from about 60 to 70 million on the low end that have died to about 150 million on the high end that have died. This is where I want to bring my boy Zig in. I still have some stuff to get through here in a minute, how Marxism's, the philosophy itself would actually lead to some of those numbers all the way through communism. But Zig, let me say this, man. So anytime if all you do is ping back and forth between the Young Turks and Charlie Kirk, which a lot of people do, if that's all you have as a filtering process is just bouncing your head between these two sort of like, what an existence, good Lord. But if that's all you have, man, you're going to be able to hear one of two things whenever this critique comes up about like Marxism leading inevitably to 150 million deaths, right? It's going to essentially be, well, look, some of those numbers are skewed or something. They just didn't get it right. It hasn't been done properly. That Marxist philosophy does not inevitably lead to that. It's just like some people perverted it. That's one. Or two, you're going to hear some type of straw man or whataboutism. You're going to hear like, okay, no one's ever going to acknowledge that those numbers are accurate. That's not part of this. Straw manning is basically where it's like, okay, I'm not going to deal with the argument that you presented to me, but I will say this much. The communism, the capitalism, also like pure unadulterated capitalism also has, 200 million. I read a comment this morning that I don't know, something about cigarettes killing 300 million people. Apparently that's one of the marks of capitalism. I don't know, bro. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But it's one of those two
Soviets
things that
didn't smoke cigarettes.
Yeah, right. That's exactly right. They didn't.
No. In Mother Russia, we don't smoke the cigarette.
No, we don't smoke cigarette. Smokes you in Mother Russia.
Capitalist pig smokes cigarette.
Anyways, it's going to be pinging between one of those two things, Zig, as far as the retort is concerned. It's just going to be like it just wasn't done properly, wasn't implemented properly, or the whataboutism and the straw manning of like, yeah, but also capitalism kills a whole bunch of people also. Here's the thing for Zig, though. That doesn't necessarily matter. Those critiques don't necessarily matter. What I just went through doesn't necessarily matter because the simple fact of the matter is that this is still a widely accepted ideology, something that is very attractive to a lot of young people. That's the question I want to kick to Zig to blow this whole thing open to start the conversation. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, Zig, but can I ask why? Can I ask why?
Well, yeah, and so here's why. One thing that you won't hear the media or other people tell you is the real attractions of Marxism. People are overlooking the attractions of Marxism and have not given proper rebuttals. And I've created a list here that I can send folks after the show, but I have about 9 primary attractions of Marxism that are all very, very important and all very appealing to so many people. One is progress. Through this dialectical method, you can see some kind of chart or a course for progress under Marxism. Now whether or not that happens almost doesn't matter. It's the idea that people can visualize and understand what actual progress is, which is very hard for people to do without some kind of visual scheme, or without some kind of simplified scheme like what Marxism provides. It also focuses on equality, okay? And yes, many people have been murdered, but the focus on equality is something that's very, very appealing to so many different people. In addition, what Marxism extols is a brotherhood of workers, okay? It says workers of the world unite. Okay, and behind that phrase, what that phrase is doing is it is filling a need for people to have community. People who don't have community are going to be excited and enthused by that phrase to have a brotherhood of workers across the globe. Now, again, whether or not they actually have that, that doesn't matter. Okay, what matters is it fills a psychological need. Human beings have needs that need to be filled. Okay. In addition, it also focuses on alienation and how people can be alienated by jobs and work that they don't like. And through that, you can have some kind of unity. Okay. They want some kind of unity. And that idea and notion is still very attractive to people, as is ending social conflict and also providing a religious satisfaction in this worldview. And the last 2 things are in eschatology, if you will, which is a complex term, but it provides a scenario for the end of times. Okay, it says in the end of times, you will have this communist utopia. And some people are excited about thinking about that conclusion. And furthermore, this dialectical method of Marxism, they say, is scientific. So therefore, people associate Marxism with science. And so for all those factors, okay, you have certain attractions of Marxism that, regardless of the facts, because it fills psychological needs, will always be appealing. Okay, the facts don't matter if your psychological needs are met. Okay, does that make sense?
No, perfect sense. And let me just step in here too. By the way, we specifically asked because Zig has a master's in philosophy. The guy knows what he's talking about. He's also very capable of handling devil's advocate type conversation. I don't think this needs to be said, but just if we have any brand new viewers out there, Zig works for AFP. He's a free market capitalist guy, right? Like he knows what he's talking about on both sides here. I don't want everyone to get the misinterpretation that there's some type of avocation going on here. It's just Zig has studied this stuff fully and understands it from both sides. And Zig, let me ask you this then, man. So everything you just said, I think in some sense, there's an appeal made to just general human beings. And the appeal, I think, would be much more applicable to younger people because, frankly speaking, I don't know, man, sometimes they just haven't had the time to properly parse all the stuff that's been going on. All right. I mean, goodness gracious, man, like Anne Applebaum, okay, she's a historian, indicates that without exception, the Leninist belief that a one-party state was and is characteristic of every communist regime. The Bolshevik use of violence was repeated in every single communist revolution. Zig knows this as well as I do, and everybody else. Every single time that this has been tried, it resulted in only one particular outcome. But Zig, let me ask this, dude. So what is the alternative just dropping the ball? Is capitalism just not presenting it properly? Is there not an alternative to fill in some of the gaps here of everything you just talked about? This genuine appeal to things that are rooted within our DNA, right? Of all the stuff you're talking about, of an answer to end times, of a talk about, well, your labor actually being worth something, of a sense of camaraderie and community that might come out of some of this stuff. Is the other side just not properly presenting what a better option could be in freedom, liberty, choice, freedom of thought, all that stuff?
Well, I tend to think that folks who are liberty-minded are not doing a great job of building community to isolate people from Marxism to start with. A lot of times instead we'll focus on quibbling about minarchism or some ridiculous abstract thing instead of actually bringing people together in a real physical space with a specified purpose and goal. I guess one takeaway then that anybody listening to this should have is that if you do not bring people together and you turn your kids over to public school, to the university, to perhaps even their peers when they're an adult, the inevitable outcome will be their support for things like this because you yourself never built the community or the relationship or the bonds that would stop people from finding Marxism attractive.
Man, dude, you know what's so stinging about that too? You know what's so stinging about that? And what's such an underlying theme with some of the stuff that David and I do in our spare time too, some of the Bible studies we go through eventually is like, dude, I think it's another part of human tendency, just like you want to blame somebody else. Like I want to be able to blame Marxism. I want to be able to blame Lenin. I want to be able to blame the dumb academic system. I want to be able to blame these naive little kids. I want to be able to blame somebody else for just not getting it. I was with my wife's family over the weekend. This entire family fled communism, fled Russia from Romania, man, spent years and years coming over here as refugees. They literally came to this country, no exaggeration, with what they had on their person. I'm talking about a suitcase full of stuff, worked construction, figured out a way to make it happen, lived the American dream. They are now in a situation where they are seeing this stuff and pulling their hair out, sometimes literally and figuratively on social media, pleading with people, pleading with Americans, just see reason. They want to be able to blame something because they just fled it as well. Ultimately, Zig, what you just said, and what's so stinging about it is like, it's kind of our fault, man. It's kind of your self-responsibility. Like we have a part to play in not properly presenting or forming community groups or being able to retort some of this stuff. Like Americans are not old, man. Like we're 240. What did we just celebrate? Was it 244, 245 we just celebrated? Was that what this July 4th was? Somebody do the math for me on that real quick. The point I'm making, Sig, is we're a very young country. The old adage goes that Europeans think that 100 miles is a long distance, while Americans think that 100 years is a long time. We are young. Our young people have nothing to compare this with. And if we, whoever the we is, you and your families out there, whoever the we is that might disagree with Marxist philosophy, if we do not take up some sense of responsibility and try and do some sense of corrective teaching or some type of preemptive outreach, Zig, what else could we expect, right? What else could we expect, man? I mean, I don't even know necessarily how you expound upon that. I do know that one particular thing, this Wall Street Journal article, before I get into some of the numbers just to substantiate the claims that I was making before, this Wall Street Journal article makes the claim that while the Soviet Union redefined human nature, it also spread intellectual chaos. This is exactly what Zig just mentioned. If you leave your folks up to just the system that has been implemented, you can expect only one reaction here, one outcome. Quote from the Wall Street Journal, while the Soviet Union redefined human nature, it also spread intellectual chaos. The term political correctness has its origins in the assumption that socialism, as a system of collective ownership, was virtuous in itself, without need to evaluate its operations in light of transcendent moral criteria. The term political correctness itself comes from this system of socialism, this system of collective ownership, man, that you don't even need to critique anything outside of the system itself, right? So, Zig, dude, we wonder sometimes what happened to analytical thought. We wonder what sometimes happened to critique. We wonder what happened to the ability to reason properly. Well, in this system, you don't have to reason properly, man. A system of collective ownership, political correctness coined in that system of ownership, you don't have to evaluate. You don't in operations in light of transcendent moral criteria. It's just not there. So, Zig, let me ask, buddy, how do we fix it from this point, buddy? Because when this happened a couple years ago, it was a pretty hard swing, and people were getting a little bit weird, man. And I know people, however you feel about Trump, it doesn't matter. At that particular time, Trump said 3 years ago, I got the John Oliver clip if you want us to play it. He said 3 years ago, well, what do we have? You know, all of a sudden we're going to be talking about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Abraham Lincoln statues being torn down. This stuff is ridiculous. He was just like laughed off, man. Just like every late night show host out there had some little comedic bit about how Trump was just, hyperbolizing the situation. He's so bombastic in his rhetoric, and goodness gracious, can you believe that this guy is saying some of this stuff like this? Like, there's clearly a line, President Trump. There's clearly a line, Mr. Trump. And it stops at whatever, fill in the blank. Nobody could believe that we'd be talking about tearing down statues of Thomas Jefferson. Hey, man, but fast forward 3 years from now, 2020, what have we just done? What are we doing now? That has nothing to do with the argument of where we should or not. It just has to do with the argument of like somebody somewhere predicted that this stuff is going to go forward. Zig, dude, can we stop it at this point? Has that train left this station?
Well, so some ways that we can stop things like that are actually being better scholars ourselves. I mean, if we ourselves had some better idea of what progress constitutes, for example, we might be able to make a better, more reasonable pitch to other people. So for example, under Marx's system, communist is a result of a progressive ascent towards utopia. It's a 7-stage process then that finally gets to this progressive utopia. But what people miss in that is what is really progress, okay, is a republic, is the Republican regime. It is the most novel form of government known to man. Okay, then that is real progress. Being able to have dual sovereignty under national government and state government, being able to voice your opinion and have those be corrected by your state senators or senators. That is the real revolutionary philosophy. But if we don't view ourselves as revolutionaries and the real arbiters of progress, and then these other people are going to call themselves progressives, and they're going to say, well, we understand progress better than you. You guys are just from the Stone Age. Okay, you guys are just backwards. You guys are just stodgy old curmudgeons.
Man, okay. That hurts to hear too, bro.
So if we don't understand that we are the real revolutionaries, carrying on to the revolution of our forefathers, which is a republic. Okay. And if we can't spread and articulate that message, we're never going to convince anybody anything.
Goodness gracious, man. That stings also, bro. Seriously, I know it's something my libertarian friends are loving hearing right now. Like, if we can't properly articulate the difference between some of these parties and stuck in the duopoly that we have right now, do you seriously expect people not to try and fill in those gaps? I mean, come on, man. Like, you can't feign progress for decades upon decades upon decades and then expect people not to call you out on your own BS. I'm going to hit the Facebook comments here, but just so I don't gloss over this, one portion that I did a major gloss over was just jump from Marxist philosophy to 150 million dead, and then we just started talking about it. I want to make sure that I'm fair to that point. Again, Wall Street Journal article, see some of these statistics listed out. Marxist convictions set the stage for decades of murder on an industrial scale. In total, no fewer than 20 million Soviet citizens were put to death by the regime or died as a direct result of its reprehensive policies. Now, that is specifically pertains to USSR. This does not include millions who died in wars, epidemics, famines that were predicted and predictable consequences of Bolshevik policies, if not directly caused by them. Now, you can go after, I mean, goodness gracious, man, if you really want to run down the total numbers of some of these, according to R.J. Rummel's book, Death by Government in 1994, about 110 million people, foreign and domestic, were killed by communist democide from 1900 to 1987. Now, that statistic was updated in 2005 by the same author, who revised his estimates of total communist democide between 1900 and 1999. So taking it from 87 to 1999. He ticked that upwards by 38 million. So his estimate is now 148 million dead. That was due to recent publications about Mao's role in the Great Chinese Famine. You can also look at the Black Book of Communism, which a lot of people don't like to cite for some particular time due to its alleged bias or otherwise. I don't care, bro. There's 15 different things I can pull from if you want to. Black Book of Communism puts those deaths between 85 million and 100 million. Benjamin Valentino in 2005, he estimates that the numbers of non-combatants killed by communist regimes in the Soviet Union, People's Republic of China, Cambodia alone range from about 21 million on the low end to 70 million on the high end. Book Red Holocaust. Stephen Rosefield said that the communism's internal contradictions caused to be killed approximately 60 million people and tens of millions and more. 2011, we go to Matthew White. He published his rough total of 70 million. 2016, the Descendant blog, Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, made an effort to compile updated ranges of estimates and concluded the overall range spans is somewhere between 42.8 million and 161.9 million. So take that as you will, man. It doesn't matter which one of these statisticians that you actually want to take the numbers for. It doesn't necessarily matter. They're all saying about the same exact thing. 50 million to 160 million? Dude, I don't know. Doesn't matter how you come down on it.
Well, I want to point out, too, that R.J. Rimmel, the one who had the biggest numbers, Grant, that wasn't just a guy. That's a guy who was a tenured professor at the University of Hawaii, and that study was paid for by the University of Hawaii, and all the resources that he would have access to as a tenured professor at the University of Hawaii. It wasn't just some guy sitting in an attic reading books,
right?
You know, so that democide study, he coined that term, by the way. Death by government, democide. All right, that guy Rimmel, I have a lot of respect for. I don't know a lot about the other authors, but that guy really, if anybody was going to be someone you should look at, it's not just some guy reading a book. It was a tenured professor, had access to lots of resources. But I wanted to come back, if you don't mind, Grant, real quick to the things that Mr. Zig pointed out as the attractions, because
interesting.
So you just pointed out a lot of the negatives, and as you've said multiple times, that is the normal Western critique or the Cold War critique of communism.
Yeah.
Okay. Those things he pointed out. People want community, so they're provided brothers of workers.
I can go ahead and provide that real quick. Progress, a focus on equality, brotherhood of workers, the emphasis on alienation, unity, ending social conflict, filling religious needs in a more atheistic time, an eschatology or end of time scenario, and just an emphasis on alleged science. I don't think what they're doing is actual science, but nevertheless, they claim that it is. But those are the 9 main attractions that I think that are fundamentally being overlooked.
And they are worth discussing. They are worth getting into a little bit more. And when I looked at that, Grant, I couldn't help but think these are all things that could be a part of any ism, any religion could have these tenets. And I want to strip it down to anytime a society places word above deed, like in our society right now, virtue signaling is the thing, not virtue doing, right? Virtue working is not the currency in our current society. It's virtue signaling. It's saying things. And when you exalt the word over the deed, and the word has a higher value than the deed, then you can justify just about any deed as long as you say the right words, like some kind of magic spell or something like that. So if you say you're doing something for the brotherhood, or you're doing something for the state, or you're doing something for science, like Zig just said, when you're virtue signaling those things, that's also something humans are used to in our genetic memory from throughout time, where people justified things in the name of the state, or in the name of their deity, or in the name of their community, saying I'm doing things in the name of the people, so to speak.
Yeah.
But take your people group and cut it down to whatever size you want, or make it as big as you want. People have been doing this for thousands of years. I think this could happen anytime, and I think that even Christianity has done these things in the past to control large groups of people, promising, and I'm just saying that to say this could happen anywhere. Like what Zig said is humans have needs, and bad people can take advantage of those needs and create control systems by offering pseudo answers to such things. But to say we're working towards this beautiful future and it doesn't matter now, your life, your freedom, your thoughts don't matter now, that's something that lots of cultures have done. To justify your bad behavior by signaling to the state or to a deity, lots of cultures have done that.
Well, but the issue, I just want to hop in real quick. The issue though is that what are we saying then that is the vision of the culture that we want, that people can imagine is made more tangible and real? That's the issue. Okay, in Marxism it's spelled out, but can we defend the vision of the society that we want? Would you feel comfortable talking about that with other people? Would you have historical evidence and historical text to support that point? That is the real challenge when you are dealing with somebody who is so bought into Marxism.
Yeah, man. Because are people trained up well enough to be able to defend? Not even are they trained up well enough to be able to properly articulate and put forward a positive argument in the alternative? Right? Sherry just said in Facebook, and then I want to hit some of these Facebook comments that have been so great. But Sherry just said in Facebook, the attraction is the rhetoric of fairness and equality. Right? The attraction is the rhetoric of fairness and equality, and I will couple with that as well, man. Something you said a second ago: fairness and equality, coupled with this aspect of science. I think for a very long time, call them conservatives. I don't care what you call them, man, but for a very long time, conservatives have been deemed as sort of the anti-science party. I think we didn't want to deal with the science of climate change. We didn't deal with the science of this thing. It doesn't necessarily matter. And I don't even care if you agree with me. That's not the point. I'm not making the point of whether that's an agreeable statement. The point I'm making is that is the modern day narrative that the media has pitched. Is that yes, thank you. Yeah, it's a meme. Shine just I don't know if y'all heard him, but in my head, at least I heard him. He said it's a meme. That's exactly what it is. That is the meme that's been going around right now. And for a very long time, instead of actually trying to articulate, just like Zig is saying, instead of trying to articulate a positive argument in the alternative, we've just been like desperately fighting against what those other side deems to be as progress. Instead of trying to articulate why some of the things that are being pushed right now is actually regressive in nature, which it is, we've been just stalling and pushing back, and what they're now being able to, I guess, define to their supporters as stalling progress in the name of anti-science. This stuff is also interwoven together, right, Zig?
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm telling you, man, like, unless we can be able to train our people properly, it's going to continually be this push of like, dude, don't you want fairness and equality? Look what these people on the right are doing. They're constantly shutting down. You want people to be able to bake a cake for you, right? Because that's a fair thing to do. You want to be able to get married to whoever you want to, right? Because that's the fair thing to do. Your body, your choice. All this stuff, man. And now all of a sudden we're coming back in the name of it either being anti-science or we look like we're not acquiescing, and that can be somehow progressive when we don't stop to realize, like, dude, it's so easily defined as that, instead of trying to present like, hang on, buddy. Like, do you want to have to force someone to bake a cake for you in a particular way that they don't feel properly? Why would you even want to buy from that guy? Why would you even want to purchase a product from that dude? Just let him go to business.
But it's not about that. It's not about the deed. It's about the words.
Right.
But hey, Zig, do me a favor. And Grant, I know I'm live programming here. We're just getting right at about 11 o'clock. And I know a lot of people plan on watching the show from 10 to 11, so we lose some people at 11.
Okay.
I want Zig to list off those 9 things again. Don't hurry, Zig, when you do it. The attractive things about communism or Marxism. And then I want to play, if everyone's okay with this, some Marxist poetry. So the guy who was supposedly offering all these beautiful solutions, like this glorious utopia and a fair world of brotherhood of the workers, which, by the way, I worked in construction. I was in the electrical brotherhood. It is attractive, even like down to the union speak. It is attractive. When I first got into electrical work, people threw their money together and helped me buy some tools because of the brotherhood. Even though I wasn't in a union, it was like in that trade. So I'm familiar with this attractiveness, but I want you to read those things again. Then I want to play someone reading this poem by Karl Marx, and you tell me if this guy really wants all these good things for you. And I know I'm still doing the articulating the bad vision of what he's trying to create, and I think we probably need to devote a whole show or maybe a week of shows articulating the promise of freedom and valuing people's individual sovereignty to create the best survival and thriving life and world they can have. But if you could, Zig.
Yes. The attractions of Marxism: 1, progress; 2, a focus on equality; 3, a brotherhood of workers; 4, Marxism's emphasis on alienation in undoing that; 5, creating social unity; 6, ending social or societal conflict; 7, fulfilling religious needs; 8, providing a end of time worldview or eschatology; and 9, an alleged emphasis on science.
All right, now I'm gonna throw this up on the screen so you can see it. And this is Jordan Peterson reading I can't remember the name of the poem, but this is into my. This is the darkest thing I've ever heard, but I'll let you. I'd love to hear the comments on Facebook and everywhere else about what you think about this.
Invocation of one in despair. So, a God has snatched from me my all. In the curse and rack of destiny, all his worlds are gone beyond recall. Nothing but revenge is left to me. On myself, revenge I'll proudly wreak. On that being, that enthroned Lord, make my strength a patchwork of what's weak. Leave my better self without reward. I shall build my throne high overhead. Cold, tremendous shall its summit be. For its bulwark, superstitious dread. For its marshal, blackest agony. Who looks on it with a healthy eye shall turn back, struck, deathly pale and dumb, clutched by blind and chill mortality. May his happiness prepare his tomb. And the Almighty's lightning shall rebound from that massive iron giant. If he bring my walls and towers down, eternity shall raise them up, defiant. Well, so
I wanted to play that because this is a guy, in my opinion, didn't know him. I wasn't alive yet. In fact, many people lived and died between the time Marx died and I was born. But this is a guy who didn't seem to like his own humanity. He said, create a patchwork of my weakness, and that'll be my strength. I will deprive my good self things. People, the good will look upon what I build and become pale and despair. I mean, forget all the stuff about God, stuff about man. The guy didn't like humanity. The guy didn't like his own humanity. And within that sphere, he didn't like what was good about his humanity. And I don't think this is a guy that really wanted to build utopia for you. This is a guy that doesn't want to establish a brotherhood for you. This is a guy who doesn't want to build a community for you. This is a guy who doesn't want to provide for needs and wants. This is a guy who who hated living and wanted as many people to be infected with that sickness of that nihilistic hatred for living as possible, and was extremely successful. He was more successful than any nihilistic human being on the planet by the numbers. More successful than, I mean, he sounds just like the Columbine kids if you've ever read any of their writings. It sounds like a lot like these manifestos you read before people go into a large room and injure and kill a bunch of people. It's very similar, except this guy figured out how to build a system where other people could do it for him for multiple generations leading on. But Zig's point, that it remains sound, that even though you can go through all that, it doesn't matter how evil he was if we're not able, and I love that you brought this to the conversation today, Zig, because I never would have brought it myself.
Right,
we have to articulate the positive vision, not just for our culture, but for ourselves. And in a deliberate way. Because like I was saying, if it wasn't Marxism, there'd be some other weird, nihilistic, but also charismatic person, smart person, who could come up with things that tickle my human needs, but provide nothing but suffering. There are probably more of those things in the buffet choices of life than there are things that make me healthy and good and prosperous.
And also, just let me add this real quick, folks. From what I understand, a lot of folks who might identify as more conservative might be fundamentally hostile, or perhaps not fundamentally hostile, but might voice opposition towards intellectuality or reading books. Well, okay, if you think that all people should be going out and finding jobs, which certainly is indeed valuable, but you don't put any emphasis on actually reading books, then when other people have read books and know more about a philosophy than you do, this is the result that then you get. Okay, if more people who are conservatives and liberty-minded people want to undo this stuff, you have to advocate for more reading instead of just more going to work. More going to work and not becoming a literate advocate for things that we're trying to defend. If you don't do that, things will continue to go into disarray.
John brought up this poem a second ago, talking about how Marx sort of had like this almost internal hatred of himself. And I think this actually plays oddly well into what Zig was talking about a second ago, is it's Marxism sort of focus on progress, right? Even that Wall Street Journal article that I have quoted in the show notes here is talking about the effect of murder when we were talking about the hundreds of millions being murdered. The effect of that murder was supposed to be producing a new man, in quotes. It's supposed to be progress to sort of a new existence, a new evolution, I suppose, in some sense. Now, I'm not exactly talking about some sense of eugenics, or maybe some people did take it that far, but at least as far as Marx himself was concerned, and as it applied to the Soviet cause, there's supposed to be on a scale to create a new man, supposedly influenced by nothing but the good of the Soviet cause, the good of the cause of the system itself. The meaning was to be demonstrated fully, Wall Street Journal says, during a battle of Stalingrad, when the Red Army, during this battle, the Red Army blocking units shot thousands of their fellow soldiers who tried to flee. The Soviet forces also shot civilians who sought shelter on the German side, children who filled German water bottles, civilians forced at gunpoint to recover bodies of German soldiers. A general, the armor commander in Stalingrad, justified these tactics in his memoirs by saying, quote, "A Soviet citizen cannot conceive of his life apart from his Soviet country." You don't mean anything, man. You have no existence. You have no individuality. I think that's exactly what Zig is talking about, bro. If we don't somehow, if we're not able to present this stuff as regressive in nature, if we're not able to present this stuff as like, look, man, not only does it take away your individuality, but if you want true individuality, for true freedom, we have to be able to give a better alternative version.
Well, and further, what I'm trying to suggest, or what I tried to imply, is that there are perhaps some anti-intellectuals who identify as conservative, Republican, or liberty-leaning, and when they have that kind of attitude, that actually pushes people further left. And then they say, well, folks on the left, they support intellectuality. They support things like Marxism. They support things like freedom. So again, if people are not advocating as Republicans, conservatives, liberty-leaning people, for people to read more books and to become more knowledgeable, you are doing yourself a disservice, and you're doing society a disservice that'll push people towards the kinds of Marxism that has statues toppled, okay, that will eventually result in violence. We need more intellectuals, and I hope Republicans, conservatives, libertarians continue to advocate for that, or start advocating for that.
This article concludes by saying, today the Soviet Union and the international communist system that once ruled a third of the world's territories are a thing of the past. But the need to keep higher moral values preeminent isn't as important now as it was in the early 19th century when they first began to seriously be challenged. If there is one lesson the communist century should have taught, it is that independent authority, the independent authority of universal moral principles, cannot be an afterthought, since it is the conviction on which all of civilization depends. If there's one lesson the communist century should have taught, it is that the independent authority of universal moral principles cannot be an afterthought, since it is the conviction on which all civilization depends. Let me hit some of these Facebook comments on the way out just to get some more conversation going, and then we'll probably end the program here. Sherry said a second ago, it's because true conservatism involves healthy skepticism. Leftist requires religious belief of the doctrine/narrative. I think that's actually what's most apt about the way that the Wall. Again, I failed to mention this. This Wall Street Journal article, by the way, was published on November 6th of 2017. The last time that we dealt with one of these pushes. I brought this up in the sense that, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that, like, this is an article that was penned yesterday. No, I mean, it's absolutely as applicable, if not more applicable now than it was even in 2017. But as hard as this author is going on some of this stuff 3 years ago, it should have been a wake-up call then. Anyways, to Sherry's point here a second ago, that this article, this author in Wall Street Journal, again, quoting him, says the Bolshevik coup had two consequences in countries where communism came to hold sway. It hollowed out the moral core, society's moral core, degrading the individual and turning him into a cog in the machine. Communism committed murder on the scale that's all but to eliminate the value of human life. essentially in one sense because it was replacing one religion with another. Some other quotes, comments here. Jonathan said, we've been deemed the anti-science party because we support Christianity. Sherry said, the attraction of rhetoric is fairness and equality. We talked about that. Jonathan said, as morbid as these statistics are, they need to be blasted. That's when we were going over all those statistics about the anywhere from 50 to 60 million to 165 million on the high end. He said, as morbid as those statistics are, they need to be blasted everywhere. I suppose in some sense just drawing attention to the idea of how terrible Marxism is. And again, I hope if anything, just what Shine said, one of the things we didn't, by we, I mean, Shine and myself and Zig didn't discuss much of what the show was going to be. It just sort of organically unfolded as you've seen today. And I think the best thing that's come out of this conversation is like, look, y'all, as unfortunate and as stinging of a rebuke as it may be to hear, we have a large part, if not the sole blame of responsibility here, by we being those that might disagree with Marxist philosophy. We have to be able to articulate something the alternative that's better. Eric said in Facebook, out of control, emotionally juvenile Marxists did that. They were practicing anarchy as defined as a verb in action that has been handed down to a true definition without rulers. That's the word actually means. They were all okay with acting exactly like the system they were so against. They had rulers, self-proclaimed. Would that happen in a power vacuum? Question mark. Like countrywide, government ends tomorrow, question mark. Yeah, probably. But I don't think the majority of the people are wanting that. We can split hairs and definitions, but to me, Chaz was an anarchy. We all know what the Chaz thing he's talking about that turned into CHOP or whatever he's saying. To me, that wasn't anarchy. That was just what people like to call rioting and looting. The word has gotten a bad rap because we can use other words. Because on a real level, once they obtained a monopoly of the use of force, they became the government, the rulers, just my opinion. I think what Eric is saying there is like full implementation of some of this stuff, man, you become the monster that you end up trying to fight. And interestingly enough, even the Wall Street Journal author, or if you want to go by way of Christopher J. Finley, or if you want to go by of George G. Watson in 1849, I have three different guys that are talking about this exact same thing. What Eric's saying is it would not necessarily be a perversion of Marxist philosophy to have an outworking that ends in violence. Augustine was famous for saying that you never judge a philosophy based upon its perversion. It would not necessarily be a perversion of Marxist philosophy to end in the violence that we have right now. That's what Finley said. He argued that Marxism legitimates violence without any clear limiting principle because it rejects moral and ethical norms as constructs of the dominant class. It states that it would be conceivable for revolutionaries to commit atrocities in the name of bringing about a socialist system with the belief that their crimes will be retroactively absolved by the new system of ethics put in place by the proletariat. In some sense, what he's saying is like your actions are justified. Your violence is justified because in this new system, they will be legally and legitimately justified for destroying the old way of life that led us to this new utopia. Let's see if I can hit some other comments here. Sherry said in Facebook, Zig, get out of here, update. I don't care about that. Zig said, Sherry said, Zig is correct. Those were novel and revolutionary ideas. Now it's time to evolve to real radical personal responsibility and radical freedom. I own me, I lead me. Whew. That's why we love Sherry. That's the truth, right? Real radical personal responsibility and radical freedom. I own me, I lead me. Zig, if you want to respond to that, saying that she said that in your comment, feel free to make a comment there on the way out if you want to, buddy.
Yeah, that's the direction that we need to go. We are the real revolutionaries. Take responsibility for yourself. Become something today. Create your own truth. Do that here with Real News, Real Friends. Make your community matter. Join us. We will amplify your voice.
Real news, real friends. It's a Zig quote that we like to take here and claim it as our own. Hey, man, that's the Marxist way, right? Goodness. My name is Mr. Henry. Zig over there in the PA way. David Shine Thompson. We love all y'all sincerely. If you ever had any questions, ever want to continue conversation, if you just want to get to know us better, I don't know, man, come join our groups. Come join these little chat sessions we have afterwards. Reach out to Kelly or whoever to include you in some of these things. I don't know, man. Just text us, reach out to us. We just want to build the community. That's all we're about. Sincerely, for real, we love all y'all. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We'll see you tomorrow.